Truth is, I sold my house, said Kevin, my brother-in-law. My husband and I were so shocked we couldn't speak, but the most surprised person was my mother-in-law. Why? Why would you do that? Weren't you supposed to come pick me up? She asked, clearly upset as she confronted Kevin. Calm down, Kevin said, trying to soothe her. He started to explain why he made the decision to sell the house. My name is Sandra, and I work from home with my husband, Robert. We both enjoyed working remotely because it allowed us to take breaks whenever we wanted. It was a peaceful setup. But then, my mother-in-law came to live with us. Although we were financially stable and didn't have any major complaints, she often questioned why we weren't going out to work. Why aren't you two working outside like normal people? She would say, looking at us with disapproval. It was exhausting to hear her repeat this over and over. We tried to explain that we were working remotely, but she just didn't understand. Aren't you just playing around? I've told Robert the same thing. When will you start working properly? Don't you care about your future? She was always worried and often said, maybe I made a mistake coming here. I should have gone to Kevin's house. Kevin is Robert's brother. He married a wealthy woman named Carol and is now living off her money, though our mother-in-law doesn't know this. Kevin asked us not to tell her. She would often talk about Kevin's big fancy house. I'm planning to move there soon, she'd say, waiting for Kevin to come and get her. But we knew Kevin and his wife were never going to pick her up. Robert once suggested that she could live with Kevin, but Kevin refused. So we ended up living with her, even though she called us unemployed because we worked from home. We just accepted that this was how she was. Then, one day, we got a sudden call from Kevin. I'll be coming over this weekend, he said, then hung up without waiting for our response. What do we do? I asked Robert, feeling baffled. Kevin hadn't changed at all. My mother-in-law overheard our conversation and looked thrilled. He's coming to pick me up. Help me get ready to move, she said, dragging Robert off to her room. Robert tried to explain, Mom, Kevin's not coming to pick you up. He probably called because something happened. But she just snorted, refusing to believe it. That can't be true, she insisted. But he didn't say anything about picking you up on the phone, did he? He just didn't say it, my mother-in-law muttered. Robert, I'm so tired of this house. You probably want me to be your housekeeper, but that's not going to happen. We couldn't understand why she was so paranoid. Since she moved in with us, she got up whenever she wanted, didn't do any housework, and lived off the pocket money we gave her. But we didn't want to force her to stay, so we packed her bags and waited for Kevin, my brother-in-law, to arrive. Over the weekend, Kevin and his wife showed up. As soon as they walked in, they had strange, overly friendly looks on their faces, which gave me a bad feeling. Just then, my mother-in-law came out, her eyes sparkling. You finally arrived. Listen, Sandra is terrible at house chores, so I have to do everything and Robert completely ignores me. Isn't that awful? She said, acting like a victim. She pushed past Robert and welcomed Kevin into our home. Are you guys mistreating Mom? Kevin asked, suspiciously. No way, we give her an allowance, she eats whatever she wants, and Sandra handles the house chores, Robert replied, looking uncomfortable, but Kevin didn't seem convinced. Robert has always been a bit clueless, probably treating Mom badly without realizing it. And it seems Sandra isn't very considerate, Kevin said. That's right, Kevin really understands me, my mother-in-law chimed in. Robert and I couldn't help but frown at their comments, but we decided to be polite and led the couple to the living room. We all sat around the table, with Robert and me on one side and Kevin and his wife on the other. Now, what are you waiting for? Serve the tea, my mother-in-law demanded. Huh? I thought you were going to make the tea, Mom, I replied, surprised. What? Making an old woman work? See, Kevin, this is what Sandra is like, she said, even starting to fake cry. I was so stunned by her behavior that I didn't even know how to respond. After I served the tea, the couple suddenly became serious. The truth is, we sold our house, Kevin said. Robert and I were shocked, but my mother-in-law was the most surprised. Why? Why would you do that? Weren't you supposed to pick me up? She asked, flustered, as she confronted Kevin. Calm down, Kevin said, trying to ease her. Then he explained, we've been in debt, and selling the house was the only way to pay it off. But now, we're broke and have nowhere to live, so we came to see if we could stay here. What debt? I asked. I was trying to start a business, but it didn't work out. Well, that happens, right? Kevin said, laughing like it was no big deal. Robert and I sighed in frustration. We only need to stay until we find a new house. Please, we have no one else to turn to, the couple pleaded, bowing their heads together. Our expressions must have been complicated, but since they had nowhere else to go, we had no choice. We agreed to let them stay in our house temporarily, but we made them promise to leave within a month. Got it, Kevin said, still laughing as he left to prepare their things. After they left, my mother-in-law sat silently, looking deep in thought. Robert and I assumed she was still in shock. The next day, the couple's belongings arrived right away. There's so much stuff. Where are we supposed to put it all? We might have to sell some of it or rent a storage locker, I said, as we moved Kevin's things. That's when my mother-in-law dropped a bombshell on us. I've been thinking, wouldn't we be more secure in the future if Kevin stays here? So you freeloaders can leave, can't you? My husband and I were shocked by her sudden statement. If you insist, I can tolerate Robert staying, but I don't need a wife who can't do anything. Get a divorce, and then the space Sandra was occupying can be used for all these packages, my mother-in-law demanded, eagerly looking to Robert for agreement. What are you talking about? He reacted, completely astounded. Then Kevin and his wife arrived, and my mother-in-law greeted them with joy. Although I was still shaken by her previous words, Robert decided to ignore them for the moment and asked Kevin to deal with the packages. There are more than I thought. Try to reduce the number, rent a locker, or sell some if you have to, Robert suggested. But Kevin glared at him and said, What are you talking about? These are important packages. How could I sell them? And what if someone steals them from a locker? Or if they get damaged? Are you going to take responsibility, bro? My husband shook his head at Kevin's selfish behavior. This is our house, you know. It's only natural that you should endure some inconvenience, right? If you don't like it, find a place to live quickly and leave. At that moment, my mother-in-law shouted, What are you talking about? Didn't I just say if you two aren't happy with Kevin and the rest, you can leave? You're basically freeloaders. You're not needed in this house. Kevin is trying to start a business, and all you two do is loaf around the house doing so-called remote work. You're a nuisance. My mother-in-law spoke as if the house belonged to her. My husband and I exchanged looks of disbelief, while my brother-in-law and his wife, initially surprised by her words, started to smirk. That might not be a bad idea, Kevin said. Mom, that's a good idea. Yeah, it's a hassle to look for a place, so we could live here instead. So why don't you sell this house to us, right, Carol? He added, turning to his wife, who nodded in agreement. Yeah, I feel uncomfortable with you two around, so it would be helpful if you sold this place to us. Plus, it seems like our mother-in-law is on our side, so sell this place to us, Carol chimed in. My husband and I were dumbfounded. What nonsense are you? My husband began, but was interrupted by my mother-in-law, who gloated. See, both Kevin and Carol agree. So what will you do, Robert? If you're going to divorce, you can stay here. My mother-in-law glared at me triumphantly, clearly relishing the situation. I braced myself to respond, but my husband spoke first. Don't you just say whatever you want. Why should Sandra have to leave? My husband's face was red with anger as he raised his voice. Don't shout like that. It's better without a burden around, isn't it? My mother-in-law retorted. You don't understand anything. This is Sandra's house, my husband replied, his tone exasperated. At his words, my mother-in-law, brother-in-law, and his wife all gasped. This is the house that Sandra bought for our life together, my husband continued, adding tension to the room. What? What are you saying? Isn't it the husband's job to buy the house? My mother-in-law exclaimed in disbelief. There's no such rule. Moreover, Sandra covers all of Mom's allowance and living expenses. Sandra took on that burden because your pension is minimal, and it would be difficult for you to have financial freedom with just that, Robert explained, glaring at his mother with an intense expression. Despite his words, my mother-in-law seemed incredulous, looking at me and snickering in disbelief. Unbelievable. Sandra just plays on the computer all day. She doesn't even do housework. Seriously, wasn't my allowance coming out of my pension? Otherwise, there's no way Sandra could afford to give me $500 a month. Moreover, she continued, Sandra is the one managing my pension, isn't she? You might have told Robert otherwise, but I'm sure you're dipping into my pension. She puffed up her chest and glared at me. I met her glare, refusing to back down. It's true I succeeded as a business owner, I said firmly. You're lying. Divorce this lying wife already. You should live here with me, Kevin, and Carol. Besides, there's no proof that Sandra's earning money, my mother-in-law insisted. There is proof. Here it is, I replied, pulling out my paycheck and showing it to her. The sight of it left my mother-in-law, Kevin, and Carol slack-jawed. We haven't used any of Mom's pension since she moved in here. If Mom ever wanted to leave, Sandra has been managing it so she could live independently. But instead, Mom, you've been bossing Sandra around, interfering with her work. You're the problem. If you don't like Sandra, you should leave right now, my husband said, standing his ground. Robert and I were stunned by the audacity of my mother-in-law and the sudden turn of events. We had agreed to let Kevin and his wife stay temporarily, but the situation had quickly spiraled out of control. Kevin and his wife, clearly uncomfortable with Robert's rare display of anger, tried to lighten the mood with nervous smiles. "Just kidding, but you sure are earning a lot, huh? I wish you could teach me some business tricks, right, Carol?" Kevin said, his voice wavering slightly. "Yeah, well, it's true we were worried about living with our sister-in-law. It seems like she's a good person after all," Carol added, forcing a smile. But my mother-in-law remained adamant. "Don't act so high and mighty. You're just a bum, Robert. Enough, you should leave too. Go outside and see how harsh this world can be." Robert and I exchanged weary glances, realizing that reasoning with her was futile. "Well, if that's how you feel, we'll pack our things and move to a new house. You guys will be stuck with a mortgage, but if that's okay with you, don't come crying to us for help. If you insist, mother-in-law will leave. Even with a pension, maintaining your lifestyle will be challenging, but I guess that can't be helped, can it?" At our words, my mother-in-law turned beet red with anger and yelled at us to get out. Kevin and his wife, panicked, tried to stop us. "Wait, you can't be serious. We don't have to do that, do we?" But my mother-in-law silenced them with a fierce look. "Don't you dare talk back, Kevin. You're going to be a CEO, aren't you? I don't mind you using my pension, so just start a company and show us how successful you can become. I'll show you what happens when you defy us." Her words were filled with intensity, leaving us no choice but to leave the house. We transferred ownership of the house to Kevin's name, and though we felt some lingering dissatisfaction from the incident, we were relieved to be free from my mother-in-law's constant sarcasm. We resumed our normal routine in a new apartment, working from home and enjoying the peace and quiet. But that peace was short-lived. One day, my husband received a frantic call from his mother, who was crying uncontrollably. "Kevin has taken my pension and disappeared. He hasn't come back in a week. Carol and I are left alone in the house, and we're in trouble. Please help us." Robert tried to calm her down, asking why Kevin had gone missing. Through her sobs, she explained, "I gave all of my pension to Kevin for his startup, but he ended up spending it all on gambling. When I confronted him about it, he disappeared." She was too distraught to continue, so the phone was handed to Carol. "Could you please call us back? We can't live like this. Ever since Kevin failed his startup and sold the house, our parents have disowned us. My dad won't forgive us for selling that house. We haven't been able to reach either our dad or mom." Hearing this, Robert and I exchanged looks, realizing that the situation had come full circle. Despite everything, they were now the ones in desperate need of help. Carol pleaded with my husband, desperation evident in her voice. As she spoke, I saw the frustration growing on my husband's face. He muttered, "I knew it," in a disgusted tone, shaking his head. "That's unfortunate, but don't involve us. We warned you when we left, didn't we? Even if you come crying to us, we won't help you. Report Kevin as missing to the police. It's none of our business." With that, he hung up the phone. I was taken aback by his decisiveness, but he turned to me and said, "They got what they deserved." I found myself agreeing with him. After all the trouble they had caused, it was hard to feel sorry for them. Despite our firm stance, Carol and my mother-in-law continued to call my husband's cell phone repeatedly. Carol, in tears, would cry about not knowing how to report Kevin as missing. We were astonished by her helplessness and told her to contact the police for assistance. Yet, even with the police involved, Kevin remained missing for some time. Then, just as we thought he might never be found, we received shocking news. Kevin had been arrested for bank robbery in another state. He had committed the crime to repay his mounting debts. Apparently, this wasn't his first offense, and he was now facing significant jail time. Carol's situation had become even more dire. She couldn't return to her parents' home and was still living with my mother-in-law in the house. Whether she would divorce Kevin was uncertain, but it was likely the least of her concerns at the moment. She had registered with a temp agency and was struggling through her first job ever, barely managing to make ends meet. As for my mother-in-law, Kevin had taken all of her pension and she now had to repay his debts. She too had started working part-time to chip away at what Kevin owed. My husband and I expressed some sympathy for their predicament, but we remained resolute in our decision to cut off all communication with them. They were finally experiencing the harsh realities of life that my mother-in-law had often spoken about, but this time it was all too real for them. Despite the chaos that had ensued since my mother-in-law moved in with us, my husband and I were relieved to have returned to our peaceful days. The weight of their drama was no longer ours to bear, and for that, we were grateful.